In the latest, Burkina Faso's armed forces have received a fresh consignment of Chinese-manufactured armored vehicles and artillery pieces.
Did you know that the United States has been courting Burkina Faso the way a man courts a woman? In recent times, under Trump's administration, Washington has tried to rebuild ties with Ouagadougou, despite Burkina Faso's clear anti-West stance and its deepening alliance with Russia. It has been a diplomatic dance, a quiet campaign of persuasion. But here's the catch: those ties will never be what they once were. Earlier this month, Burkina Faso's military quietly made another bold move on the global chessboard. Reports from Burkinabé local media revealed that the country's armed forces have received a fresh consignment of heavy Chinese-manufactured armored vehicles and artillery pieces. For a nation under relentless jihadist assault in the Sahel, this shipment marks another decisive step in Captain Ibrahim Traoré's mission to strengthen and modernize the army. The arrival was anything but ordinary. The equipment, captured in leaked footage shared by a TikTok user, showed row upon row of war machines lined up at a port, their camouflage blending into desert sands and dense forest greens. These weren't just symbolic purchases. They were weapons built for the terrains Burkina Faso's troops know too well: the scorched Sahelian north and the perilous forested borderlands. The shipment included VN22B fire support vehicles, PL-05 120mm self-propelled gun mortars, and SR-5 multiple rocket launch systems, all cutting-edge systems produced by Norinco, China's state-owned defense giant and one of the world's leading weapons exporters. Each piece of hardware represents a leap in firepower, mobility, and precision for an army long constrained by outdated gear. This delivery isn't an isolated event. It's part of a multi-phase modernization program that Traoré himself announced on December 31, 2023. The goal? To transform Burkina Faso's military into a force capable not just of holding ground, but of taking the fight directly to insurgents. To prepare for the reality of intense engagements, as Traoré described, across the unforgiving arid north and the dense hostile forests that line the country's borders. For decades, the West armed and trained Burkina Faso. Now, the tide has turned, and the weapons fueling this new chapter of Burkinabé sovereignty come stamped "Made in China." The centerpiece of this shipment is the VN22B, a wheeled fire support vehicle designed for speed, agility, and striking power. Built by Norinco, China's defense powerhouse, the VN22B is no ordinary troop carrier. It mounts a turret with a powerful cannon, often a 30mm autocannon in Burkina Faso's configuration. Paired with advanced sighting systems, it can pinpoint targets with deadly accuracy, whether in the narrow streets of a village or across the vast open fields of the Sahel. This matters because jihadist groups in the region, affiliated with Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, depend on mobility. They strike hard, then vanish before conventional forces can respond. The VN22B is built for this kind of fight. Its speed allows it to chase down elusive fighters, while its cannon gives it the firepower to suppress enemy strongholds at ranges safe from small arms and improvised explosives. On the battlefield, it acts as the shield and spear for infantry units, covering their advance, breaking enemy positions, and buying time for heavier assets to deploy. Complementing the VN22B is the PL-05, a unique hybrid, part mortar, part artillery gun. Armed with a 120mm weapon, it combines the ability to bombard from a distance with the precision to fire directly at visible targets. This dual role gives Burkinabé commanders a crucial edge. Whether it's flushing jihadists out of fortified caves, dismantling a roadside ambush, or neutralizing light armored threats, the PL-05 provides versatile firepower on a mobile platform. Just as important, it can relocate within minutes after firing, avoiding counter-battery fire and ensuring the army stays one step ahead in a conflict where mobility often decides survival. These weapons are more than just machines. They are symbols of a turning tide, proof that Burkina Faso is no longer relying on the West for its survival, but arming itself through new alliances, with China now firmly in the picture. In Burkina Faso's context, where insurgents often entrench themselves in villages or carve hideouts into rocky outcrops, the PL-05 proves invaluable. Its ability to fire at steep angles means it can arc shells over obstacles, flushing fighters from cover, while its flat trajectory capability delivers direct hits against immediate threats. Built on the chassis of a wheeled armored vehicle, the PLL-05 can keep up with convoys across the harsh, uneven terrain of the northern provinces. Unlike static artillery, which risks ambushes and counterattacks, this mobile gun mortar stays in motion, striking fast and withdrawing before the enemy can respond. But perhaps the most formidable weapon in this new arsenal is the SR-5 multiple rocket launch system. Another product of Norinco's defense industry, the SR-5 is designed with modular architecture, capable of firing both guided and unguided rockets. That flexibility makes it as precise as a scalpel or as devastating as a sledgehammer. It can deliver pinpoint strikes on command centers or stage-wide area barrages that overwhelm insurgent gatherings in seconds. The system's reach is equally impressive. Depending on the rocket type, the SR-5 can strike targets up to 70 kilometers away, or more. For Burkina Faso's commanders, this means the ability to disrupt jihadist supply lines, cut off reinforcements, or destroy assembly points long before ground troops make contact. In the fluid, fast-paced warfare of the Sahel, where insurgents survive by speed, concealment, and constant movement, the SR-5 is a game-changer. It denies militants the freedom to maneuver, forcing them into defensive positions that can then be overrun by advancing Burkinabé troops. Together, the VN22B, the PLL-05, and the SR-5 form a new triad of firepower, one that transforms Burkina Faso's military from a force constantly on the defensive into an army with the tools to seize the initiative, strike first, and reshape the battlefield. What this all means is simple. China has now become a viable and, in many cases, preferred weapons supplier for Burkina Faso. And it isn't just Burkina Faso. Across the continent, Chinese arms are making serious inroads. Côte d'Ivoire, Gabon, and Mali all field China's VP-11 armored vehicles, while Kenya employs the CS/VP-14 for similar protective roles. Piece by piece, Chinese hardware is spreading across Africa. But here's the big question. Why have Burkina Faso and so many other African nations turned to China for weapons? For decades, the West, particularly France and the United States, dominated Africa's arms market. Their guns, their vehicles, their aircraft filled the arsenals of African armies. But now, the tide is turning. In Burkina Faso, the shift began under Captain Ibrahim Traoré. His rise to power completely upended the status quo. French troops were expelled, marking the collapse of Operation Barkhane, the French-led counterterrorism mission in the Sahel. And while American troops have not been formally expelled, the relationship is deteriorating. Security cooperation with Washington has been scaled back, sparking outrage in the U.S. Capitol. According to Traoré, the reasons for this break are straightforward. The West does not treat Burkina Faso as a partner, it treats it as a pawn. France pressured the country into buying outdated or unsuitable weapons, dictating what it could or could not acquire. The United States went even further. After the coup, Washington flatly refused to sell weapons to Burkina Faso. It was a form of political pressure, an attempt to starve the military government into collapse. And the blockade didn't stop there. The U.S. also used its influence to block Burkina Faso's access to arms from other Western nations, tightening the noose even further. Imagine that, being told not only that you cannot buy weapons from America, but also being barred from buying them anywhere else in the West. For Traoré, this was not just interference, it was domination. And it was the breaking point, and that's where China entered the picture. Over and over again, Washington insists that it wants to be Africa's only true partner. Yet in the same breath, it blocks African nations from accessing the very tools they need to defend themselves. Is that how a true partner behaves? This contradiction is at the heart of why Burkina Faso and many other African countries are turning to non-Western powers like China. When President Trump sent an envoy to Ouagadougou earlier this year, Burkinabé officials did not shy away from the issue. Minister Karamoko Jean-Marie Traoré welcomed the gesture, acknowledging the importance of sending someone to the field to get first-hand information. But his message was firm. Burkina Faso now has a new vision for its foreign partnerships. Cooperation, he said, must be rooted in respect for sovereignty. Any partnership that undermines the independence of the Burkinabé state will no longer be tolerated. On security, Minister Traoré's frustration was clear. He lamented how some nations, including the United States, use principles as an excuse to prevent countries fighting terrorism from acquiring weapons. His words cut straight to the contradiction. Burkina Faso is on the front lines of jihadist violence, yet the West places obstacles in its path, refusing to sell weapons and even blocking access to arms from other Western suppliers. The U.S. Deputy Undersecretary of State, newly appointed in January 2025, responded by pledging to personally invest in unblocking the situation, promising progress against terrorism and its financing in the Sahel. But the reality tells a different story. Despite the diplomatic gestures, relations between Ouagadougou and Washington remain strained. The proof lies in plain sight. Burkina Faso's latest weaponry didn't come from the U.S., it came from China. And the reasons are clear. China offers what the West will not. Its weapons are cost-effective, its delivery is prompt, its financing terms are flexible, accommodating cash-strapped governments. But above all, China brings something the West refuses to: engagement with no political strings attached, no lectures about governance, no conditions about who should or should not be in power, just business, just weapons. For Burkina Faso, that is not just a deal, it is liberation. Take Burkina Faso, for instance. The United States blocked its access to weapons not because of terrorism concerns, but to pressure the military government into stepping down and transitioning to civilian rule. But here's the real question. What business does Washington have dictating the form of government in a sovereign African nation? African leaders do not interfere in U.S. elections or demand regime change in America. So why can't the U.S. mind its own affairs and focus on its own crises instead of meddling in Africa's? This is the heart of the problem. For too long, the West has trampled on the sovereignty of African nations, interfering in domestic affairs without consent, often in ways that insult the dignity of entire peoples. Just look at the former U.S. President, Joe Biden. It wasn't enough for him to ban the Russian media outlet RT within the United States. He extended that ban across the African continent, unilaterally deciding what Africans could and could not watch. His justification? That RT was used to spread hate against the US and the West. But the reality is that Africans were never consulted. To make matters worse, Biden's administration used its influence to pressure social media platforms into removing Pan-African outlets as well. Voices that challenged Western dominance were silenced with the stroke of a pen. And the pattern doesn't stop with the US and Niger last year. It was the European Union's turn to overstep. Without even informing the military authorities, the EU funneled aid into the country through an NGO. The Nigerian government only found out days later through a social media announcement. Imagine that. An entire sovereign government bypassed, treated as irrelevant in its own territory. When the authorities discovered what had happened, they immediately ordered the NGO to send the aid back. It wasn't just about the aid, it was about sovereignty and the principle that no outside power has the right to dictate terms without respect. These incidents are not isolated mistakes. They are part of a broader pattern, a mindset that Africa must always be managed, controlled, lectured, or manipulated. But in Burkina Faso, Niger, and across the Sahel, that era is ending. And this is the crux of the matter. Despite repeated attempts by Washington to rebuild ties, Burkina Faso continues to look elsewhere. Why? Because the trust is broken. For the Burkinabé authorities, the United States has never proven itself to be a reliable partner. Every gesture now, from envoys to vague promises about unblocking arms sales, rings hollow. The only reason Washington is reaching out again is because it sees its influence slipping away in the Sahel, not because it truly wants a partnership of equals. Until the U.S. proves otherwise, until it can build cooperation based on mutual respect and benefit, Ouagadougou will continue to ignore it and seek out other partners. Captain Ibrahim Traoré has learned from history. He knows that depending on the West alone for weapons is a recipe for vulnerability. One refusal, one sanction, one blocked shipment, and the entire fight against insurgency is compromised. That's why Burkina Faso is no longer placing its bets on a single supplier. The recent Chinese deliveries are only one piece of the puzzle. Over the past year, the Burkinabé army has also brought in Egyptian-made Buffalo E-10 mine-resistant vehicles, an upgraded version of Cairo's Temsa 2, the pride of Egypt's domestic armored vehicle industry. Alongside them, Turkish-built Ajdar Yalçın armored personnel carriers have been integrated into Burkinabé operations. Each platform brings unique strengths, from mine resistance to troop mobility, creating a diverse and flexible arsenal. This is not accidental, it's a deliberate strategy. By diversifying its suppliers, Burkina Faso reduces the risk of overdependence on any one nation. It ensures that if one door closes, others remain open. It guarantees access to different technologies that can be adapted and integrated into joint operations. In other words, Traoré is building a military supply chain designed for resilience. For the West, this is a sobering reality. The days of monopoly are over. Burkina Faso, and much of Africa, is no longer waiting on Washington or Paris. It is charting its own path, with partners that respect sovereignty, deliver quickly, and demand less political theater in return. But Captain Traoré's vision goes beyond simply diversifying suppliers. Burkina Faso is investing in something even more transformative, building its own arms and ammunition industry hand in hand with its allies in the AES bloc. The signs are already visible. Just weeks ago, Burkina Faso showcased its first light armored vehicles at the Synergy of Safety, Security, and Defense exhibition in Ouagadougou. Built on pickup truck platforms, these vehicles feature reinforced armor, protective turrets, and tactical upgrades. They may not yet rival the polished machines rolling out of Western factories, but they are a bold step towards self-reliance, designed to give Burkinabé troops mobility and protection in some of the most volatile combat zones.